there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Writing Tip Tuesday. I'm Sammi, and I'm a writer who likes to help other writers become better writers. This week, I want to talk to you about talking about your story because it's something that a lot of us writers can have a hard time figuring out how to navigate and knowing where the line is. What should we talk about? Who is interested in hearing us talk? How can we possibly be confident talking about our writing when we don't know where it's going to go or when it's going to happen or all of that kind of imposter syndrome type things. So I think it's totally fine to talk about your story at any stage. So I want to talk about the different ways to do that at all of the stages of your story's development. So the first thing that I want to point out is that you should always believe in yourself when you are talking about your writing. The easiest way to lose someone's interest is to feel like you're not saying something that matters to you. If you're not saying something that is important to you, why would it be important to them? Why should they listen to you talk about this thing that you want to do if you're not even sure that you want to do it? So just believe in yourself. Even if you don't believe in yourself fully internally, channel every part of you that does. Because if there's a part of you that wants to write, that part of you believes in you. So speak on your writing, your projects with confidence, even if they are not at a stage where you feel confident in those particular projects, because you are speaking on yourself as a human being with a writing interest, not an unfinished project, not a work in progress. Confidence is engaging in conversation, and it keeps people's interest held for longer than if you were less confident. But there is always a fine line between speaking confidently and believing in yourself and becoming a dominator of the conversation because of it. So be mindful of the other people who are participating in your conversation and make sure that you are not overstepping any bounds or coming on a little too strong about it. Then at any stage in your writing process, you should always know a one-sentence summary of what you have, a one-sentence summary of your story. In the many screenwriting classes I took, this is the thing that would be referred to as a logline. This is a super condensed version of the movie's plot, and it can be applied to pretty much any situation. So I think the formula of a logline can be beneficial in helping beginning writers condense their story into something more easily manageable in general conversation. The logline formula always involves your protagonist, the inciting incident, an action, and the antagonist. The most beginner logline formula is typically following the shape of when inciting incident happens, protagonist decides to take action against antagonist. Where you can fill those in, a lot of people don't know who your characters' names are. So if you're like, Sammi decides to train harder to win the race against Miranda, nobody knows who that is. But if they're like, the girl who had been wrongly disqualified from the previous race decides to train harder to take on the person who disqualified her, something along those lines. Or for example, let's say the Hunger Games, right? When her little sister is chosen to be a part of the deadly games, a backwoods self-taught bow hunter decides to take her place to protect her from the threat of the Capitol, or along those lines. Not every logline has to be in the same format. Not every logline has to have the same factors in them, but those are typically the most common ones. If you don't have an antagonist and the conflict is more internal, then it's going to be something that's more internal. And that's totally fine. But being able to boil down your story into something that is a sentence, where if somebody says, "Oh my gosh, you're a writer? What are you writing?" You have the ability to say, "I'm writing a story about what happens when this happens to this person and how they retaliate by doing this." And that's enough for most people's general niceties. The problem usually comes from us being too passionate about our own works or us not being confident enough in our own works. So knowing how to draw the line with developing enough confidence in yourself and your writing when you talk about it, and where to draw the line when it comes to not being overzealous about how exciting it is that you are writing this amazing story. Because not everyone cares. And that's the unfortunate truth of the thing, is that not everyone cares about the things that you care about as much as you do. If you think about it, you don't care about the things that everyone else cares about as much as they all do, because that would be so hard to do. So if that person you're talking to is intrigued by that one sentence summary, how do you continue on the conversation based off of where you are currently in developing that particular story? So if you are in the stages before you start writing, you've got an idea, maybe you're outlining, maybe you're making characters, all of that kind of stuff. If you're at that stage, you can talk about the message or lesson you want the book to be able to teach or come across with. You can talk about any cool factors that you're excited to explore. One of these that I actually had a conversation with one of my coworkers was I was just talking about how I want to write the story. I didn't bury them down with any heavy details. They asked me a question and I answered it saying, I'm currently working on trying to finish developing the magic system. So they asked me again about my magic system, and because I'm excited about it, I was able to go into a little bit more detail on that particular thing. So because I pointed to something directly that I knew I could talk about because I'm excited about it, that gave me more room to have that conversation. Where if the person on the opposite side is not very interested in that direction of the conversation, if they're like, oh, are we writing magic? Cool. Like, you don't have to keep going any deeper. You're not already on a train that's going full speed and is very difficult to stop. You can also talk about any character ideas you have, any archetypes that you're hoping to pull from and play with, anybody that you may be basing a character off of, like this character is loosely based off of Samuel L. Jackson. Because I feel like if this were a movie, Samuel L. Jackson would play this character. Like anything like that, that makes for interesting conversation for the other person also a part of the conversation rather than just you being excited about this thing. If you have already started writing your story, you can talk about your characters. Why do you want to tell your character's story? Why does your character's story matter to you, and why do you think it would matter to others? That's something that can be relatable to a lot of people. And if you're like, oh yeah, I'm telling this story about a character who is general description, not necessarily like, oh yeah, they're 6'3", they've got brown hair, they wear jeans. Like, nobody cares. Like, that's not the part that people care about, but like maybe it's about a doctor who falls in love with a florist who has issues with commitment. Like, that becomes a little bit more interesting and something more engaging for the other side of the conversation, and it gives them the room to have more comments on it. If they ask, oh, what does this person do? You can say, this person's story is important to me because of XYZ. And that can be a direction for that conversation to go. You can talk about any major conflicts that you know are coming, something that you're excited to see your characters navigate. You can even talk about your antagonists. Who is working against your main character? Why do you think they're working against your main character? Any motives that you already have for your antagonist, you can talk about. You can also, of course, talk about anything that someone in the pre-writing stages may have talked about, because it's your story and you know what parts may be interesting, what parts you are the most confident in, and what parts may be the most engaging for your conversation partner. If you are finished with a draft and you're in the edits time frame, you of course should talk about anything that you're proud of. It doesn't even necessarily have to be directly story related. You could even say, I'm really proud of myself for finishing this draft in the year that I wanted to get this draft done. Or I'm really proud of myself for figuring out how to differentiate my two narrators and things like that. Something that you are proud of will always be a good option for discussing your story when you are at that point. For you, first of all, because there's certain levels of mental gymnastics that need to be done, and there are some that just sort of happen, and giving yourself time to be proud of yourself before you start editing or while you're in edits is always beneficial in the long run. And then, of course, there is the opposite. If there's anything that you want to improve upon on the next time that you end up going through your story, if there's something that you're like, oh, I really wish this character had more depth, so I'm probably going to be looking for them to have more depth in my next edit or anything along those lines, it can be humbling for the person, for yourself, and for the person who is participating in your conversation. There are some people who look at writing a book as this major, insane accomplishment that like they could never do. And that's a very limiting belief. And having somebody who is willing to talk to them about having completed a draft and having a full story that they are working on edits of, having somebody nearby who can make it seem more accessible, make it seem like, oh, you don't have to have your first draft available. Oh, you don't have to have the final draft on your first try. Something like that may be something you can read into a conversation, whether it's a good place to place that. Some people, opposingly, feel like anytime a writer mentions something that they can improve upon, it's them complaining about not doing something when they are participating in a hobby as an attempt towards a living or something along those lines. You really have to read your audience for that one. And of course, if this person that you're having a conversation to about your story is someone that you are going to have read it, talk to them about anything that you want them to keep an eye out for, but try not to be prescriptive in it. Like if you're like, tell me if this character seems sarcastic, they're gonna tell you that that character either does or does not seem sarcastic. But if you're like, keep an eye on character C, I want to know your opinion on character C when you're done, that's going to get you a more genuine answer. So let them know anything that you want them to keep an eye out for. If you're like, hey, can you keep an eye on the narration for me? See how that sounds. Something vague enough that it's not going to prescribe how they should read into the character, and something that you know you want a second set of eyes on. If you are about to publish or you have published, I consider these sort of the same area of your writing stages because they're similar. There's only one real difference, and it's whether or not the book is on shelves yet. But if you are on the publishing route, you can talk about like why you're choosing to publish the way that you want to publish. You can talk about what your goals are for publishing. Of course, when you are publishing or published, you can talk about what you're proud of because there's no reason not to. You are publishing and or have published a book. Why wouldn't you be proud of it? And you can talk about why the person opposite you may like the story that you're telling, why they might want to read it, that kind of stuff. You can talk about most of the other things in the other sections, like why your characters are important to you, cool factors that set your story apart, like how your magic system works or something along those lines. I wouldn't give too much away because if they haven't read your book yet, you want to sprinkle them in. Give them your logline as that motivation to talk to you about your story, and then leave it in a bit of mystery. Like, let them want to read your book. That's what it's all about, is getting people to want to read your book, isn't it? Unless it's not. If it's not and you're like, you would hate this book, you can tell them as much as you want about it, but if they would hate it, you probably don't want to tell them everything about it. It's neither here nor there. That's entirely like an audience choice. And that is probably the main thing to do when you are considering talking about your story. Pay attention to your audience. Who is the receiver on this monologue of your passions? Do they care? It's so hard to tamp down on something that you're passionate about. And I know this from personal experience. I will go on an entire monologue and realize halfway through that no one is listening to me, but I know I can't stop because I am on a roll. So I don't, or I do, and then I feel bad about stopping because there was so much more I wanted to get out. So I know perfectly well what it's like to navigate having a conversation about something that you're passionate about with someone who is not as passionate about it as you are. So pay attention to your audience, pay attention to where they are leading the conversation. That's why you have stepping stones. So you start with the log line, then you say, I'm really proud of this thing. If they ask more questions after that, keep going. Everything that you add to the conversation has the prompt for another question if you want to continue talking, and the space to end that part of the conversation. You'll probably end up finding somebody who is just as interested in your story as you are. I'm usually that person for people. I love hearing other people's ideas. I love seeing their faces light up and like how excited people get about talking about their characters and what their characters are gonna go through. So you just have to find somebody out there like me to talk to you and walk you through what questions they have, what they want to see you talk about, and all of that. But if you just meet somebody for coffee or something and they're like, oh, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a writer. I'm writing this story that's about logline. Oh, that sounds cool. How far into the process are you? I'm at this stage and I'm really excited about writing this. Oh, that's cool. That's just being polite. That's being polite. They don't care, unfortunately. But if you get that person that when you say, I'm really excited about this thing, oh, why are you excited about that? You could keep going. You just have to keep prompting them with things that they can ask questions about if they wanted to, and be emotionally prepared for if they don't ask the questions. Because more often than not, people don't want to ask the questions. And it's so sad. But I promise there are people out there who do exist and do want to listen to your story and hear you talk about it, be excited for you, with you, about your story. Speaking as one of those people who exists nowhere out there. But that is all I have for you today on how to talk about your story at the various stages. If you have any questions, or if you feel like I didn't touch on anything, like how do I talk about it if I'm like this? Let me know in the comments down below. I will be happy to make a follow-up if anybody has any questions. And if you liked this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out and show YouTube that maybe more people will like or learn something from this video. I will see you guys back here on Saturday for a Story Study Saturday. So if you don't want to miss out on that, hit that subscribe button, the notification bell next to it, and I will see you then. But I am here every Tuesday and Saturday, so I will see you back again on Saturday.